on the Block Party. I'm your host, Joyce Conroy. We are back on Ernie's Corner, award-winning creative director and designer Ernie Cefalu, and we are really jogging a lot of memories. Just so amazed at the logos that Ernie has designed. I mean, over 500 logos. And Ernie, I can't imagine the days before the internet.
Yeah, Joyce, it is truly uh, bringing back a lot of memories with you and I doing these things. And this one was sparked because of what we did last time with Lou Reed and Mick Jagger and David Bowie. The logos that, nobody knew that what, those three had in common beside music and different kinds of music, really, but still music. And yet there's a whole story to be told about the artwork that was done for each one of those three guys. And when I started doing, the research to put the show together that we did, I started realizing there's so many more, like you said, over 500, almost over 500, almost 560 different logos, corporate and music. But I never, we talked about this, about how, to me, the focus has always been on the concept of what I was doing and who I was doing it with, and the artwork that was being done, the finished piece, whether it was a photograph or an illustration or whatever. My main focus was on that. But the idea, the concept is always kind of overlooked by the power of the deliverable illustration or photograph. That's the thing that people really see first. That's the thing that gets their attention. And the lettering is all part of that, but not as big as the actual main theme of what it is. It's always like secondary to it. And the concept is usually overlooked completely. It's really vapor. It's smoke that dissipates. When you have something that's real, like a piece of illustration or a piece of art or some lettering, that's a tangible thing that you can really hold in your hands. And I have so many of these pieces. And when we were looking, for the Lou Reed, Mick Jagger, and David Bowie piece, I was going through, I mean, I've got thousands of pieces, not only just the original artwork on things, but sketches and comps and different things that really sort of went into the making of these pieces. And going through all that stuff, I realized that there was much, much more than just Lou Reed, Mick Jagger, and David Bowie. There's all these other groups too. So, and thank you so much for being open enough to doing, another episode of the lettering that, forget about the concept, forget about the finished illustration. This is all about the lettering and what I was going through. It's one thing to direct people, and have the idea and direct people to execute your idea. And that's really, but to actually do the art yourself, that's a whole nother level that a lot of people don't have. I mean, there are art directors and creative directors that don't really do art. They just have good taste or they have bad taste and they direct others. I was very lucky in the fact that not only was concept, the idea, a major thing for me. I had the ability to be able to do some art, some illustration, nowhere near the level of the people that I was working with, but the concept was always there. And then if it needed lettering, I was able to do that, which is so weird because we had talked about this before. Lettering was never anything that I liked. I mean, my mother would get me jobs during the summer, doing signs for her hair salon or something like that, or Catuzzo's Market at the corner. And I always kind of pushed back on it and never really liked it. And then once I started getting into it, once I did a little taste of it in college, and it was okay. But when I went to New York, when I became, an artist in the big city, the whole thing changed. And I started looking. I learned about type houses. I learned about specking type, but it was very limited. It was extremely limited, and there were things that I wanted to be able to convey in the lettering, along with the photograph or illustration, that I couldn't find. So I had to depend on myself to be able to do it. Matthew's Southern Comfort, that logo for that album was one of the first things that I really did for in the music business. Even Jesus Christ Superstar was set type. That was a Times Roman font that I used that said Jesus Christ Superstar. I did the Angels. That was, again, that was the graphic piece of it. But then in 1972, when we started Pacific Ioneer, I needed a logo. And I didn't want to set it in type so much. I wanted to be able to do something special. And I've always been a car guy. So to me, this Pacific Ioneer logo that you see over my shoulder here looked like a hood ornament, and so I did this lettering, I did this logo, and actually it started with this one over here, without the circle. That came later, but the lettering that said PEE was line art that I did, and then I needed to give it more than just a line thing. It needed to have more importance than that. So there was a young illustrator, airbrush illustrator named Dave Willardson that had just graduated Art Center, and he was really an amazing airbrush artist. And I had seen a couple things that he had done. He was just getting started. He was just out of college. He went on to become very famous. If you Google, or any of our neighbors here want to look at Dave Willardson's work, guy's amazing. Just Google his name and you'll see the stuff that he did. But he was just getting started. I gave him a phone call and asked him if I could come over and show him some lettering that I did that I wanted airbrushing done. And I went over. He was working out of the basement of his house. He was living in Pasadena near Art Center. I went over there and I showed him the line art that I had done. And he did the airbrush that you see over here to make it look like chrome. He did it for $50 because that's the budget that I had. I had $50 because Tony and I had just started Pacific on Air with Lou Morris. Each one of us put in $2,500. We didn't have a lot of money to be able to spend on doing a logo, but we needed a really good logo. So Dave agreed to do it for $50, and that's how that kind of happened. Then there were some uses that needed to be able to not have halftone in it. Okay, like we did T-shirts and stuff, and we did metal flake in the silver silk screening and the black line art. I mean, they were beautiful shirts. I mean, everybody loved them. And but there were some times when a halftone wouldn't really work. The usage was mainly just line. So I took the line art that we did and we created this circle around it that you see there, the Pacific Ioneer, and sort of making it a brand. And in those days, we ruled the circle with ruling pens and drafting tools. And then that lettering you see curved like that, I had to have it set in a straight line. And then you cut out the type. It came in a proof. You cut it out and you went in between each letter and made a cut so that you could fan it. There was no way. There was no
So
way.
intricate.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
make a
yeah. So when you see
mistake.
that lettering, it wasn't set like that. In those days, you could only set type in a straight line. So I picked a really Helvetica typeface because that's all newspapers, magazines, all Helvetica. So I did that font because it's really readable. And I sat there for hours cutting out a strip with white above and below the letter itself, and then going in between each letter and making a cut, and then fanning it to where, I mean, it sounds crazy, but and you never think about it, how that was done in 1972. That's what, 52 years ago?
Yeah.
There were just a few dinosaurs left on the earth when I was sitting there at my window, looking out, seeing the dinosaurs falling over and turning into oil. I was making little notches between each one of those letters and the ones underneath too. And so once it was curved, then I could take and give it to the filmmaker who could then shoot it and size it into that circle. But it had to be cut. The good thing is that circles are always circles, no matter whether they're big or small. So I cut it into a circle that would be pretty close to what the art was, so there wouldn't be a lot of distortion or having to make a bigger cut or a shorter cut. And so when you look at that, I mean, you don't really see all the stuff that went into it. But when we talked about doing the Lou, Mick, and David part, I really started looking back at some of these things, and just what I just described to you, I haven't thought about that in probably 50 years. But which is so wonderful about you and the block party, and all our neighbors are interested. I'm so pleased at the response that we get from every show. I send you, you get up in the morning and I send you, we crushed it again. I mean, in each one of these is going over 1,000 people just on the Facebook posts that we're doing. And then aside from what you're getting and what Jack is doing, it's pretty amazing. And it just says to me that what we're doing is a good thing.
People
And
are so wonderful. We really
yeah.
do appreciate your support and your willingness to learn about
Well,
this.
when we have just a quick little sidebar here, we have a great audience, a great neighborhood that everybody's in. And we wanted to, you and I know we talked about this, wanted to give a shout out to Andreas, who had lost his cousin Melissa last week. And our prayers and thoughts are with you. And you're just such a wonderful person, Andreas. And I'm going to make sure you know that we're going to talk about you on the show today.
That's right.
So
You get a shout out too on the block party, and our love and prayers are with you.
yeah, yeah. And he's such a great person. And Melissa was very, very sweet and a fan of the show as well. So, it's really, Facebook is such a great tool. In the wrong hands, it's a bad thing, but in the right hands, it's a wonderful thing and it's a wonderful experience. And meeting you and Tom and doing this show together every week is so meaningful to me. And, it's not about an ego. Even these shows about the lettering, it's not about an ego. I mean, I always tend to give credit to everybody that's involved in whatever it is that we do. And I have an ego. We all have egos. But for me, it's always kind of secondary. And that's why it's so cool to be able to bring this to the forefront in these last couple shows. I mean, we've talked about it before in other shows that we've done, but it was always really the image and the actual piece that we created, illustration or photograph. And the emphasis really went there. And like I said, the lettering always seemed to take a secondary spot. But, today, last time, this time, we're going to be able to bring it to the forefront a little bit. And so I wanted to bring together this piece.
Ah, there's Quincy,
There's
handsome as
Quincy.
ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a logo that Quincy reached out to us after I did when I was still at Craig Braun, I did the Smackwater Jack album, and we had done a show on that.
Yeah.
And so coming to Los Angeles and starting Pacific Ioneer, we got a chance to work with Quincy once again on the $600 in a Mule production that he created. I had met him. We had talked about the Smackwater Jack album that I had done that he really liked. I never got a chance to talk to him about that. I met him when I was at the Save the Children concert in Chicago. We were doing the album. We had talked about that too, and he was there, and I got a chance to meet him. And we talked about that Smackwater Jack album, and he really liked it. And so I get a call from him. We get a call from a Pacific Ioneer in 1971, or actually, I'm sorry, in 1973. He was doing a stage production of $600 in a Mule, which was, a thing about blacks who actually, after slavery, got, land and got, money from the government to get them started. And so we did a Smackwater Jack album for him. I'm sorry, no, we did the logo for the $600 in a Mule cover. And then in 1974, he reached back out to us and said, hey, I want a logo for myself. I need a logo for Quincy Jones Productions. And so, and I want you guys to do it. And because by this time we knew him, we had been in some of the rehearsals for $600 in a Mule, and he knew how to reach out to us. We were in the crossroads of the world, and was very close to A&M Records, which he was involved with a lot. And so we did this logo that you see behind me here. I did this lettering for him, and he still uses it to this day, which is really such an honor for me because he's such an icon. I mean, the guy has just I mean, he's amazing. He truly is amazing. Probably one of the best producers and musicians out there ever in our history. He's far surpasses, you know, Bob Ezrin or some of these other guys, even Bones Howe. They all had major respect for Quincy. Quincy was the, the aspirational person to be after, and try to get that kind of piece about themselves and what they're able to do. I mean, you name it, he's produced just about everybody in the business, and everything he does is just incredible. So for me to be able to do that, lettering for him, for me to be able to do Smackwater Jack even before I knew him, for me to be able to do $600 in a mule, and Drew did a beautiful illustration, a very Art Deco illustration for the $600 in a mule piece. And I think we had talked
We
about
did,
that.
and it was
Yeah.
just a beautiful
Yeah.
image.
Yeah. And again, working with these illustrators, I was able to uh, accentuate what they were doing. The $600 in a mule lettering was definitely dominant. It was on top, but his illustration, that Art Deco woman, I mean, was so, and actually Quincy wanted that artwork, but I didn't give it to him. By that point, my partner was saying, stop giving away the artwork. We need to keep it. And thank God for him, because I gave away a lot of pieces. And even Drew was like, he would go to Bonnie and say, hey, tell him to stop giving away the artwork. Those pieces are going to be your future. Those are going to be your retirement. And you know what? He was right. He was right. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I went to, the hippies and stuff. You give everything away. If somebody wants it, you give it to them, and Tony grew up in New York, and he was like, you don't give anybody anything, and Bonnie was very much along with Tony and, getting me to stop doing that. And today, now, 54 years later, I'm so glad they did, because I was able to keep a bunch of stuff. And this lettering is definitely one of those pieces, and the $600 in a mule piece too. So, now we're going over to let's see, Shauna, 1974, another one
Oh,
for Shauna.
Sha-na-na, all
Yeah,
right.
and they were so good. These guys were so amazing, and I'm already a child of the 50s. Okay, so all the music that they're doing was stuff that I grew up with. It was the rock and roll I grew up with, and when we got a chance to do the Hot Socks album for them, um, I was over the moon. I mean, I had already done the Stone Stung. I had already done, Jesus Christ Superstar. I had already done a lot of these other covers, but Sha Na Na was a group that held a special place in my heart. And they were so awesome. I mean, they really were. I didn't get a chance to meet them, but Tony did, my partner. He was on the East Coast a lot more than I. I pretty much held down the West Coast office. But this Sha Na Na lettering came out of our New York office, and I wanted to do something real boppy. They didn't really have a logo up until we did this Hot Socks album, and the album was great. It was a guy and a girl dancing, and they're in the background, smaller, the group, and it's a real 50s kind of thing. The kid's wearing a leather jacket from high school, and she's got the bobby socks on, and it was just a really nice album cover. And this lettering, I had done it straight at first, and then we put it on an angle, and there was a 45 that went down under the letter, a 45 record that had Hot Socks on it. And, it just was a beautiful cover. It came out really, really well. And I was really happy with how this lettering came out. And again, this is another one of those that's ruling pens. And then there's a thin line, a thin outline that goes around this lettering that was really crazy to do, because again, there were this is all before rapidograph pens, which hold the ink and have different point sizes. That came later. This was still ruling draftsman's tools to do all this crazy stuff. And I think this logo ended up taking me 2 or 3 days to do. And again, I had to do each letter, even though the NA repeated itself. You couldn't really cut it and make a print and put it next to it. It just didn't work. You just had to do it all on one piece. So and to make them consistent like that, I mean, I look at these kind of things and go, man, there's no way I could do that today. Just no way, even with modern tools. It's so much easier for me to do a sketch, and that happened later on. That started happening in the late 90s when computers were really big, and I just do a sketch. And then I give it to Bob Inglesiepen, and he would do it in the computer, and it would be just like that. He could do something like that in a few hours, and it would take me a few days. So it just wasn't time wise, it wasn't realistic to sit there and do it. And so some of the later things that I've done and the newer things that I've done were that they were just a sketch, and then it went into the computer and we have a digital file. So it's kind of like the concept, it's in the wind, it's on a cloud somewhere, and it isn't a tangible thing that I can hold in my hands unless I take it down from the cloud and print it out, and then it's a thing, but it's not the original artwork. It's a representation of it. I have the sketch and that's cool, but that became like it was a whole different kind of mindset. So, now I want to go to this album.
Oh, I bet. Is that the main course
This the
album?
main course album,
Oh, that
right?
was a good one.
It really was. And it's so funny how this album happened. This lettering, by the way, it's probably it's my Carney, Lou, for
Leon
Leon
Russell.
Russell, the Carney. We talked about that logo, beautiful logo. This is my Carney, and it's really held its course. I mean, one of the other things about these logos that I've chosen, I've done a lot of them, but some of them were just one time. The Rolling Stones time, one time. Some of these other groups that we did logos for were one-time use because they didn't do it after that. Earth, Wind, and Fire is another one that we'll talk about next time, that they used it over and over. And the Bee Gees were really into that. And this album came to us because of the Jesus Christ Superstar album that I had done, and then working with Robert Stigwood on the first production, doing the libretto and all that for Jesus Christ Superstar. And one day we get a call years later after Superstar and after the play that we had done. We get a call from him and he said, hey, I've got this group I'm working with and I want a logo for him. And, I think you're the guy that can do it. And it was the Bee Gees' main course, which was a big introduction for them into the disco world. And I love this lettering. I mean, like I said, I have all these lettering pieces. A lot of them are framed. A lot of them were in museum shows. And this one has been in two different museum shows, one at the Smithsonian, one in the Forest Lawn. Then it was in two or three gallery shows. But it's really held true to today. And again, we talked about the Beatles and how they changed music and how that you perceive music, and the stuff that they had done still is relevant today. This logo was done in 1975. So that's 23 years or 53 years ago. And it still is used today by the one remaining Bee Gees, and anybody that does stuff for the Bee Gees always does their rendition of this lettering for whatever they wanted it to say. But this is the original. And this logo was really tough because I couldn't, again, like Sha-Na-Na, you can't repeat the E's even though they're in there twice. You had to do them. I had to do four E's and they all had to look the same.
Oh, what a
And
task.
and there was no font. This is I only did these letters. And in those days, there was a time that if you did something like this, if there were places that would be willing to buy the font from you so they could resell it. It's kind of like what Getty does now with images. They
Hmm.
bought all the original images and they sell them to you for usage and stuff. But in order to do that, you had to do every letter, uppercase and lowercase, unless it was just uppercase or just lowercase, upper and lower. And then you had to do all the commas, exclamation points, and all the numbers 1 through 10. And they would buy them but that would take months for me to do. And I never had that time to be able to do that. So in this case, I did a B, an E, a G, and an S. And that was it. I only had to design those letters. I never did an alphabet. I never did numbers or anything like that. Although in later on, people that would do stuff for the Bee Gees and needed something to be like that font, whether it's numerical or letters, they would use this as the template to go by. And I find that really kind of rewarding, not only in the fact that here we are 52 years later and it's still something that could have been done yesterday, like a Beatles song. And other people have used it. Other people have tried to emulate it. Always comes up a little bit short in my mind, but you know, doing lettering and logos, combining letters like monograms, just I gotta tell you, Joyce, it just became so easy. I could see just by looking at, I would, if I got I needed a monogram or I needed a logo that would go with lettering and that say the initials were LMS. I would put the letter LMS, I would letter it out, just write it. And then I could look at it and see how those letters should fit together in a harmonious way. I mean, it was kind of crazy how that started happening to me. I mean, I could just look at stuff and know that, oh yeah, this will work with that, and oh, this should look like that. And then I'd start sketching, and maybe by the time I do half a dozen sketches, I had it. Now I do one or two because it's so easy. It's become like falling off a log. I mean, it's easy to do. And for me, that's such a rewarding thing because like I said, I never really liked it that much. I never really thought about it that much. And then later on, you see how those letters start fitting together. I can look at things and see when spacing is wrong, too close or too tight, or too far away. So it's become an art that I've been able to really refine over the years, and still to this day I enjoy doing lettering and logos and stuff like that. Because it's a lot easier, all I have to do is a sketch and give it to Bob. Bob puts it in the computer and makes it beautiful. So it's like Dave Willardson airbrushing the P logo for me. Bob can make it look like it's airbrush. He can change the colors. It all happens so quick and so beautifully. I mean, it's never been easier.
I liken this Bee Gees logo to what I'm picking out is inside the lettering, there's like an image. And,
Yeah.
right on that bit, this is our friends, that are listening audio. I'll kind of describe it for you. In the B of the Bee Gees, looks like there's a J in there in their song Jive Talking.
Yeah.
And that, you start to see the music inside the
Yeah.
lettering, at least for me.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it is. I mean, that was the other thing. Just like we try to tie an illustration to the messaging that was going to be with that particular album or that particular company, it had to be reflected in the lettering as well. And this lettering really does the same way that the Rolling Stones tongue looks like the Rolling Stones music, the same way that Jesus Christ Superstar, I could have made a picture of Jesus or whatever. It needed to be those angels, and it became a universal thing. This Bee Gees lettering has become a universal thing. A lot of these logos have become that way over time, which is really, it's so rewarding for me because I always try to do things that were not following trends, not following fads. We talked about this before, doing things that could be timeless, and learn that from the Beatles. They did music that a lot of that stuff sounds like it could have just been done, and I really learned from that. I tried to do things that would be historic instead of a fad or a trend where you could look at it and go, yeah, that really looks like it was done in the 60s.
Hmm.
That looks like it was done in the 80s. I try to, you know, I try to make it more universal. I guess that's the better word, historic, something that you could look at and would go, wow, that's really cool. Even today, that's pretty cool. So, yeah, Anyway, so that was that. And now we're going to go over here and we're going to talk
Oh,
about,
fog hat, yes. And
yeah,
I know you did the
slow ride.
Low Ride Pacific Pioneer. Was it the Energizer LP, Ernie, the Pacific
Yes.
Pioneer did the design on?
Yes, and this logo, they needed a logo, and we all they had was that little guy with a big hat,
Yeah, I remember
like a
that.
little cartoon thing that was kind of weird, but they needed a logo. And so I did the Energized album, right. Carl Ramsey did the illustration. It looked like a Flash Gordon monitor with all the glowing lettering and stuff around it. And so I did this fog hat logo that looked like neon, that was connected into the whole thing and the way it worked on the back. And we just carried that whole neon thing over. And these guys kept on using the logo, like the Bee Gees, like some, Alice Cooper, a lot of those, the Stones. They have different variations of it, but it's still basically that tongue coming out of a mouth. So, and recently I had a chance to meet with the drummer
Roger
from
Earl. Did you talk
Roger
to
Earl.
Roger Earl? Oh,
Yeah,
lucky you.
yeah, and he was amazed. He had no idea that I had done that logo or that album for them. He'd always wondered, but never had a chance to meet with him or talk to him in person. And I talked with him, and Jay from the Icons logo, the talks that we were doing, he knew him, and so he set it up so we could have a conference call with him and do a show around it. And he was blown away. I mean, he was just beside himself, and I was too. I always liked Foghat. Thought they were a great band. They were really unique, and they had a great sound. And Slow Ride was one of my. Cherry Cherry was another one that was, big for them and with me. And they were just here in the desert a couple of months ago. I didn't get a chance to go to it, but I don't go to concerts so much anymore. I kind of got burned out. We would go to so many, and it was just, I don't know. You get older, I feel very comfortable right here in my little bubble in the desert, and don't have to go anywhere really. Don't have to do too much, which is really nice. I mean, I like being able to have that ability to do that. And so, yeah, Roger was really, really a great guy, and we have exchanged emails. In fact, he invited me when they were here in the desert to come to the show, and I just, I have to be really careful because Bonnie has asthma, and I don't want to get around a lot of people, and like I said, I kind of got burnt out. I'd rather just go to iTunes, put on Foghat, get and just sit there and listen to them while I'm sitting here working or whatever, getting ready to do a show with you. So I've become very lazy when it comes to that. And then I haven't done that many albums. I mean, there was a time when we were doing between 4 and 6 albums a month, along with the corporate work. So we were doing a lot of work. We were always busy. I was working 6 and 7 days a week, just to stay ahead of it, because we weren't doing just album covers, and I don't think that there was a design firm doing record covers that was doing corporate work as well until there was a guy in the 980s called Rod Dyer, and he was mainly he did Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. He did a couple albums for Alice, but they kept coming back to us, which is great. So, but he had come from the corporate world, but that wasn't until the late 80s, and we were doing this stuff in the early 70s. So we were really, even Hypnosis in England, was only doing album covers. And I always wanted to keep a foot in corporate America. That's where I was, my first ambition, Madison Avenue in corporate America. And so I also wanted to be able to be diverse enough to have the ability to do a lot of different things and never get pigeonholed for one thing. So, that always kind of weighed into it, and we never stopped going after corporate work, and it's really great because today most of the work I do is corporate. I went from 4 to 6 a month to doing maybe 1 or 2 a year, which is fine. I mean, I've done 250 album covers. If I never do another album cover, that's okay. I've got plenty to talk about. Even though a lot of it was back in the day, it's always going to, every generation, it's going to be new. and they're going to discover the music. They're going to discover the block party. They're going to discover Joyce. They're going to discover Ernie and Ernie's Corner. And it's wonderful. Thank God for the internet. But this logo came out really, really nice. And these guys kept on using it, which was really gratifying for me. And it's great for them because one of the things that you learn in corporate America is consistency. You want to get a message across, tie it to a brand. Then, in the 90s, everybody became brands and they learned how to create a brand and be a brand. And we were doing it back in the 70s because of Madison Avenue and the work we were doing in corporate America, learning that, but also, trying to create for these bands that we were working with something they could use in merchandising and marketing and advertising that would be recognizable to them. Rolling Stones and Jesus Christ Superstar, those are the two biggest, single image kind of things that you can look at it without any lettering and you know exactly what those are, those two. You don't need the lettering to go with it. It's just that graphic. And I've done several of those in corporate America and some in, I think we talked about Black Oak, Arkansas, and the little acorn with the muscle and the lightning bolt. I mean, all those things are so great when you can do it without, it's like Nike. It used to be the swish with Nike. Now they got rid of Nike and then it's just a swish. Everybody in the world knows it. Adidas, Puma, they followed in likeness to Nike. They were very smart in doing what they did, and people have been doing that for years. I mean, you go back and look at some of the major brands in the world, Coca-Cola, another big one. I loved working with them, and we had talked about the hub thing that we did for them a while back, and it was great getting the Kraft and Nestle. I worked with Nestle for 30 years, getting that learning, getting that education of how to do that, having more than just a gut feeling that there has to be that goes with it. There's a purpose. And, another big example of that is this guy.
Oh, Alice.
Yeah, you can't not talk about Alice, and Alice, we had done several different logos for Alice, starting, with Schools Out and the desk. And that was really no logo it was mainly just the desk. But then when we started doing more work for him, Billion Dollar Babies was had some lettering that went with it, and that the coin, with the lettering on it, but at a certain point we needed to come up with something that was Alice, because by the time that the Greatest Hits album was over, Alice had gone off on a solo career. We had done work for Michael, Bruce, another album for him later on, but Alice was the main focus of what our attention came to, and we needed to come up with a logo for Alice. I did a logo for the Welcome to My Nightmare album, some really nice lettering, but it wasn't enough. It said Alice Cooper, but it didn't feel like Alice Cooper. It just felt like some funny lettering, some unique lettering that you'd never seen before. But it didn't really say Alice Cooper like the Bee Gees logo. The Bee Gees says Bee Gees. I mean, it's got their
Absolutely.
music, and you put your finger right on it. It felt like the music. So we needed something that was all Alice. It had to be Alice. And we had done, like I said, we had done several albums for him. And I even did a nice logo for the Greatest Hits logo for that album, that St. Valentine's Day Massacre looking thing. And like Welcome My Nightmare, it just said Alice. The Greatest Hits just said Alice. We needed something that when you looked at it, you saw Alice in it. And this logo really did it. This logo really, really did it. And he still uses it to this day. There's different variations. We did some where the blood is dripping and, and it's red and black and it really, but the eyes, nobody had done anything with the eyes. We were the first ones to make the makeup in the O's. And again, it was like looking at those fonts and again, this was hand lettering. I think we had talked about it before. Each one of those letters was a separate letter that I had done. I never sat there and did ALICE. It was A, and I did 5 or 6 different A's, big pieces of paper with a brush and ink, and splatter it and do an A. I probably did 5 or 6 A's, then you do the L, then you do the I, then you do the C, the E. The only one that was repetitive was the O's, and even those are different. But each one of these letters was done separately, and then I cut them all out and put them together in this configuration. So it was like back when we were doing the little slits between the letters on the Alice Cooper on the Pacific Ioneer lettering and fanning it. This was kind of the same thing. I took each letter and made a reduction of it, a stat of it down size, so I didn't have to work on it big. Something like this needed to be done big. You couldn't sit there and do it. It needed to have the freeness to look like it was, otherwise each one of them would start looking the same and stuff. Every letter looks different. The E's are kind of similar because they are like the O's, but I mean the E's were, but the C and the A and the R, they're all different. The L, I mean, and some of them are thicker and thinner. I mean, you needed to have that kind of freeness. It couldn't be tight with a ruling pen or a draftsman's tool or a rapidograph. It needed to be a brush in ink and just splatter and do crazy stuff with it. And that's kind of how we ended up with that. And again, another one that I ended up doing this logo on the Constrictor album, which brings me to this last thing that we're going to do. And this is kind of where I'm going now. The Cefalu thing, I'm creating a Cefalu brand with shirts and stuff. And this logo that you see over here is the Pacific Ioneer, the new Pacific Ioneer logo that I use for the direction that we're taking the merchandising in. I've hooked up with a company called Brandenstein, and they do wearables. They do hats, they do shirts, they do glassware. I mean, it's amazing. And it's a guy that was a programmer that created this, and it's mainly AI stuff that he does print on demand. I mean, so I am giving him images, and we're going to start out with a dozen or so, and he's going to put them on shirts. I have a Pacific Ioneer shirt here that he just did. I don't know whether you can see it that well because it's a white shirt, but it's got the P. No, see, I have a problem with that.
I see the
Got-
PEE there.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a P logo. This was a shirt, an original Pacific Ioneer look that we did when we did Pacific Ioneer with the metallic ink and stuff. And he's got these machines that will do it. A shirt like that would take him probably a minute to do. And it's right into the fabric. It's not a heat transfer. It's not silk screening. It's a subulation, a fabric subulation process that puts it right into the fabric. So I've created this Cefalu brand, and we're calling it Pacific Ioneer Creating Art History. And that's what you see over here with the Ioneer. People really kind of like that, did that a while back, and people really gravitate toward it. And so we're going to use this on the Brandenstein site that sort of, because along with the images that we're going to be putting up, we're going to be telling the history behind Pacific Ioneer and who we were and what we did, because that's all part of the brand. I mean, if you never knew that we did any album covers, you're going to see this logo and creating art history. It sort of makes you want to go, well, what kind of art history did you create? And it's all these music images and stuff that we've done, thousands of them. So we're going to start out, we're going to see where this goes, but this is really the future. So I did this lettering and, did this logo, and we'll see where it goes.